Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Dear listener, I hope you're managing to do all the things that help you stay well in these times. I've been very much with the sense of trauma we are all experiencing as we move through the recent months and years. It strikes me that this time holds a similar quality to that of being in the birth canal. During the labour process, there's a point at which the mother's contractions become relentless and the baby's head is pushed down towards the cervix, but the cervix is closed. There is such a force coming at us, but there is not anywhere yet for us to go. During this point, we can't see where we need to be. We are locked into this space, and the space becomes unbearable. Yet our innate gravitation towards life as babies kicks in and intuition takes over. And it feels very much like this time we're in. It's a traumatic time and it's a huge struggle to bear witness to what we're being faced with on a daily basis in the world. These are acting as contractions, these events. They feel relentless and unbearable. And I am, of course, imagining that the earth is our mother. My perspective is that we are within her experiencing this, and not yet knowing for sure that there is a world out there where we are about to be welcomed with love. There are people already out there building that new world and these beautiful communities which are not overseen by corrupt, failed systems and power-hungry leaders, but are born of loving grassroots cooperatives valuing freedom and equality. There is a sense that we need to go that way, but it's as if we are being purged from this old world that is failing before our eyes, and something else takes over. We cannot quite comprehend it yet because we've been in one state of being so long, but we need to entrust ourselves that we have a focus on where we want to be and keep our focus there and not give up the struggle, but to propel ourselves forward. So I offer this because thinking in this way about the difficulty of being in the world right now, it's helped me these past few months, and I hope it may help you too. As you may know, I'm focused on completing my book at the moment, which is due out later in the year, but I have a couple of exciting projects coming up too. Firstly, I'm part of a weekend workshop on the theme of fairies for House of Zophiel in Sheffield on the 5th and 6th of July. So that's a residential. It will be a creative and intuitive exploration around fairies, and I'm very much looking forward to it. I will post the link to that on the show notes. The other exciting event is a body mirror system of healing workshop, which will be coming to Bristol in November. This May marks 20 years since I first attended one of these workshops for the very first time with Martin Brofman, and I continued to train with him until he very sadly passed away in 2014. This upcoming Bristol workshop is on the weekend of the 22nd and 23rd of November, and it will be taught by Martin's wife, Aniek Brofman. During that event, the participants will practice seeing auras, chakras and thought forms. I learned to understand the relationship between the body and their consciousness and how symptoms in the body reflect tensions in the consciousness. We will learn about chakras and their associations with specific parts of the consciousness and specific parts of the body, and we'll learn how to put that all together into the healing system. For me, it was a life-changing experience, and I am so happy to be sharing it with others. I'll post the link on the show notes, and I'll also post the link to the Healing and Consciousness episode, which I released about my own experience with using the system or having a healing for the first time with Martin, which was utterly life-changing. And for me, it was as if somebody, switched the on switch in my life. So I hope some of you are able to join us for that in Bristol. And I hope I may see some of you also at the House of Zophiel event in Sheffield in July. In this episode, we hear from a lovely couple from Scotland, Pamela and Brian, who hold a very special relationship with the natural landscape and have experienced a number of mystical states in and around sacred sites. One of these is West Kennet, where I have also had a very enlightening and moving experience, which was transformative. Another listener wrote to tell me about a strange occurrence at Silbury Hill that both she and her husband witnessed. I will be sharing these encounters on the bonus episode on Patreon. Join us there for the bonus material and much more. But in this episode, the couple describe very strange otherworldly happenings on a number of occasions. I really enjoyed this gentle conversation, and it was so lovely to chat with like-minded souls. I know that many of your listeners will recognise these kinds of feelings that they describe, and as I say in the episode, it really is this magic that human beings are meant to experience with the natural world. This is an important part of our beingness with nature. We are part of it, and if we open to the enchantment, it enriches our lives. The other world is here now. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I hope these discussions offer hope to you, knowing that we are pushing through this time together and that the signs of disruption we are witnessing are, to me, signs that we are leaving the old ways behind. So we find our communities and we hold on together, helping each other and finding the way forwards through these times. Much love, and always remain curious. Time to renovate. Time to renovate.
Back in 2015, in the middle of October, we took a trip down to Glastonbury and did some touring around the area. And we went to West Kennet Longbarrow. And from there, I decided to walk along to Silbury. And we still can't work out to this day why Pamela didn't go on. She stayed in the car. So I kind of just wandered along, kind of introduced myself to the area, as I kind of tend to do. And I've did some chanting and meditation towards Silbury. Watched some red kites quartering along the way, and it was all kind of rather lovely. But on the way back, as the road crosses the River Kennet, so not a big river. It's not even a very visible bridge, but you could see the water, and I stopped because I heard what sounded like two voices, possibly more, having a very animated conversation. And it was very, very rapid fire. And I listened for a minute or so, just to kind of make sure that it wasn't just the sound of water going across stones or whatever, some kind of weird audio pareidolia. But it genuinely sounded like a really in-depth conversation. And I did consider sticking my head under to see if there was anybody in there, small bridge, but then discretion got the better part of me. I didn't want to offend any non-human people who might be there. I think Scottish folk tales are rife with tales of people just picking up casual curses, and we were having a really nice time, so I didn't want to do anything daft. It was quite interesting. I try to also consider things from the skeptic debunker point of view. And if it was just the sound of the River Kennet and going through that bridge under the road, you kind of expect it to be something that was common knowledge or recordable or repeatable. But it's the sort of thing that I don't think we've ever heard tell of. So kind of chalking it down to just overhearing a little bit of something that probably should have been privy to. But when I got back to where Pamela was, apparently it was quite animated.
Yeah, because I remember it, from my point of view, it's a wee bit different. I'd been up at the Long Barrow for a bit longer, sat there for a while, eventually headed down to the car. And then when Brian came back, he just seemed full of adrenaline. He was really hyped. And that kind of expression, mannerisms, tone of voice that you'd think somebody had just witnessed an accident or been in an accident. He had that kind of like slightly shaky thing to his voice and even his sort of physical body. I thought, oh, something's happened. And I thought, what could have happened? There's nobody here. And then he told me, and I have very probably got this wrong, and I think I put that in my email to you, that my recollection was that Brian said at the time that there were 3 voices, and that they were distinctly a female voice and 2 male voices. But that is one of those things about memory. You don't really know what the truth is. You know what your brain remembered, but you just can't see what was the case. So I obviously concede to you because you had that experience, but that was my recollection, was you just being so kind of like hyped and a wee bit like, how do I explain this to you? Something really strange just happened. And then when you said that, I was going like, I'm drinking it all in, thinking, oh wow, that's, I think I'd be scared. But it was quite interesting for me to see your reaction like that. And I mean, Brian's not a small chap, he's 6 foot tall. And to see this guy kind of like coming around going, whoa, this just happened. But I totally understand the way he feels as well, because I've been in a situation with something otherworldly, and I always thought if I was given the chance to look, I would absolutely take that opportunity. When faced with it or not faced with it, I couldn't look. Yeah. I was just absolutely frozen with fear and thought I won't be able to undo whatever I see. So I can't let that into my own reality. So I just chose to ignore what was going on and shake a little bit. So I totally get it. Yeah, that it was an interesting experience, but it wasn't something that you saw. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do concede that I may well have got the number of voices wrong over the intervening years. But yeah, it was just one of those small snippets of that's something interesting. And as Pamela said, the weather wasn't particularly bad. It was a little bit, it wasn't even that overcast. Perfectly by Scottish standards. And there weren't any other people about. So it's not like you could say that somebody was fishing or doing something and taking shelter under the bridge. There would be any real reason to do that.
I mean, I was up at the vantage point kind of thing. I was kind of looking down from the Long Barrow and I'd seen you sort of disappear off, and there was nobody else. I think there was one car in the lay-by when we arrived, and those people were up at the Long Barrow, and they left quite quickly after we arrived. They probably just thought, our space is being invaded, I've had enough. And it was just us. So when he told me that story, I thought, there's been nobody walking about. There hasn't been a car. Just don't know what you heard, but I believed you 100%. You convinced me that there was something happening there. It wasn't just a gurgle. And I think sometimes you convince yourself that it wasn't that strange. I think it's almost, for me, a self-preservation thing. As time goes by, I tend to dilute experiences and think, oh, well, it could have just been that, and almost talk myself out of it. But being that sort of outsider to your experience, I remember how you were when you came back, and I don't remember exactly what you said, but...
and it was me thinking I was all relaxed and groovy.
No. Not at all.
So that's the Silbury Hill escapade.
Coming all the way down from Scotland, where there's all these sort of fairy lore and fairy tales, and we go all the way down It's about as far south as we've ever been. And there we go.
That sense when Brian came back, you sense there's something happened, there's something shifted. There's a sense, there's a quality about these experiences where it kind of stays with you, and you know that there's something, you can't quite put it into words, or it's not a tangible thing, but it's something, and you kind of sense it. Do you remember what the voices sounded like, or what kind of language they were speaking?
It was Spanish, but faster. It's very much like that. It was an animated back and forth. And yeah, I tried to identify any kind of semblance of a language base that I could recognise, but it was really, really too fast for anything else. So, and again, I didn't hang around for too long. It was kind of an acknowledgement, gave a bit of respectful nod on the way off, and went on my way.
Do you remember what the tone of voice was like?
It was lively, but it wasn't angry.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very, there was no aggression. It was like a very, very animated discussion between two folk, or possibly more, who are just having a right old chat about something.
Yeah. What time of the evening do you think you were there at?
No, it was the middle of the day. It was
the day.
Yeah, it was mid-afternoon.
Yeah, I felt it was later afternoon. Personally,
I wouldn't say any more than 3 or 4 o'clock.
Right. Okay. I would have put it at the 4 or 5 o'clock in my mind. But then the light would have been different to what we're used to, because it's quite a bit further south.
I guess.
Can't remember the difference, but yeah, the light's different. It certainly wasn't like lunchtime.
No, shortly after, but it wasn't that twilight effect where things get a bit interesting. But no, middle of the day, middle to late day.
Yeah, broad daylight, wasn't dark.
And what time of year do you know?
It was mid-October.
Yeah, it would have been pretty much bang on mid-October. Yeah.
So we are heading into that kind of Samhain vibe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some listeners may already be drawing comparisons with Dr. Neil Rushton's experience at the top of Glastonbury Tor. Now, I had a discussion about that with my guests of this show and pointed them towards his experience. Like them, Neil was alone at the top of the Tor when it should really have been populated with other people, and he heard 3 people speaking in a language that he could not decipher or recognise. And so if you haven't listened to that episode, head over to YouTube and hunt that one out, because it's very interesting similarities with this experience. Can you kind of relate it to anything that was happening for you in your life at that time, as in transition? And obviously you're walking over a bridge, which is interesting, isn't it?
No, I was going through the Obod's work at the time. I say to this, if I was thinking not long started the Arctic grade, which is one of the reasons we went to Glastonbury. So I was kind of knee deep with that. So, it's a nice framework to develop your creativity in, and everything else that goes with it. So, yeah, it was of a particular mindset, very much so at the time, yeah.
Did anything kind of shift in your life afterwards then, after that experience?
Not dramatically, no. Just the usual chaos of life. Again, I wouldn't say it was a massively significant or life-altering experience. It was just really, I overheard a conversation between some folk. they might not have been corporeal, they might not have been human, but it's just that basically.
Healing has helped me many times in my life when I'd reached a point where something needed to change. In 2005, I trained with Martin Brofman to learn the body mirror system of healing, which was life-changing for me. It's based on the idea that the parts of your body that don't work well reflect the parts of your life that don't work well, and about which you have tension in your consciousness. The understanding is that tension is stress, and stress causes symptoms. In a distance healing or in-person session, I move up the chakras, returning each one to wholeness using a colour map. During the process, I see images and situations, I hear words or receive impressions that tell me something about what caused the tension in that person's life. The feedback at the end of the session is a really big part of the healing. If you're interested in a chakra healing session, you can contact me at scarletofthefae@gmail.com. The fact that you were doing the bardic, the training, did you notice any kind of shift in your relationship with nature or anything in that kind of regard, or ceremony and ritual?
There was a lot of it going on at the time. I had some interesting meditative experiences. I used to cycle through parks to get to where I was working at the time. And after doing some deep meditation the previous night, I actually felt the trees observing me as I was cycling along. It was another very brief thing, but it was kind of like, oh yeah, kind of normally it's a one-way conversation of me going, hiya, how you doing? Oh, there's a lot going on in that whole area.
Definitely. I find it a very, very powerful place. What did you sense in there, Pamela?
I can't remember very much. I have terrible memory. I just enjoyed it. I wanted to stay. When Brian headed off, I just thought, I want to stay here. I want to enjoy this a bit longer. And there was something about Silbury Hill that actually made me a little bit scared, a little bit uneasy, I would say, rather than scared, to be honest with you, which I don't understand. So for me, I just felt safer and more comfortable up there at the Long Barrow. I don't really remember any other kind of feelings.
So let's go back to Patron. They're kind of at Loch Tay, and there's a wonderful stone circle halfway up a hillside. And we took a jaunt up there of a day, and again, it was another quiet Octoberish mid-afternoon, and we were up at the stone circle for a while, and we kind of came down, and there's something that might have once been a cairn but has had some other debris dumped on it, so we walked towards that, and we found some star jelly, for want of a better word. People say it's frog spawn after the tadpoles have hatched, but this was nowhere near a body of water, or the nearest stream or river was...
Well, Loch Tay, you could see in the distance. Yeah, it's quite far. So, I mean, I think the star jelly thing is one of those things that it kind of defines that day for me, because that was so weird. I've never seen anything like that. We photographed it. I had to stop him from touching it. I was like, no, you're going to have rubber gloves and a proper forensic kit to touch that. You're not going near it. But so that kind of defined the day. But for me, that day was more about
what happened next.
Yeah.
From there, as you're walking back down to where you would get back onto the path, there's some woodland kind of diagonally on the left, and can't remember if it was 1 or 2 hares.
I've got a
when we were
recollection
taking
of
it in
two.
tandem. Yeah. We were hare-led into the woodland through a small gate. And when we went in, why not? The quality of light was oversaturated with the greenness and the kind of just the sheer vivacity of life. It was absolutely stunning. We've been back since, and it's not quite been the same. But it's very mossy, very wet underfoot, and the sphagnum was virtually glowing. It was so green, the way the light was coming through the trees, or that whole otherworldly experience.
Yeah, it really felt like we were being led, because we were, quite happy. We'd done like a nice walk through a gorge, beautiful, climbed up a hill, saw a stone circle. It couldn't really be more perfect. It was gorgeous. And then there's this hare. It was just like it was beckoning us. It wasn't like it was running away. It was kind of looking at us as if, are you going to follow? And we did. And it wasn't easy, because the way the land lay, there were areas that were just like trenches full of water with the runoff from the hill. You had to be really, really careful with your footing, and then find a narrow bit to pass over. There was a couple of bits like that, really like a trench, like an embankment almost, we had to climb over. And, the hare appeared again. And we went, right, it's right at the entrance to that bit of woodland. And there was a little wall as well. So there was a slightly enclosed part to it. But you have that feeling of, am I going to cross that threshold? And we just went, yeah. So we went in, and it sounded different. The air quality was fresher. Maybe that's just the plants and trees doing their thing, but the colour was amazing. It was like someone had gone up to an old TV set and just turned the saturation up just enough, and a bit of brightness, and you just were like, wow, that's amazing. We walked through, and it was just beautiful. I mean, I've walked through many a woodland, but it just felt lusher underfoot, softer. It was quite incredible. And although we've been back since, and it was gorgeous, it was lovely, something had changed. Yeah, it was that feeling that you'd sort of stumbled over this little pocket of magic, and it was really nice.
Yeah,
nothing more special than that. But that for me was so special. It's intangible. You can't really explain. I mean, anyone who's had that feeling knows. But it's so hard to put into words. But we both were there, which is nice, because we could kind of go, that was crazy. It was like that must be what people talk about when they say they're pixie led, but led by hares.
That's wonderful. And I totally get what you mean as well, with the sense, the vivid colours and just that sense of otherworldliness. It's like you're seeing the world through a different perceptive filter.
Yeah. Maybe the world as it really should be.
Exactly. It feels like a lovely blessing. Did you have anything kind of nice that happened in your lives after that? It just feels like, I mean, that in itself is the gift, isn't it? But I'm kind of curious as to whether it kind of fell at a really good time for you.
That was
2018.
2018. Actually, you got really ill the next year. So that was a freaky accident. If such things can occur. But I don't remember anything specific for 2018.
No, the only other significant thing was also that year, the late August bank holiday, and I had the day off, and I thought, right, there's a place that we've spoken about several times that's always intrigued us, and it's up at Dumgoyach, which, when you look at it from Glasgow, it looks like the sleeping giant. So there's a large outcrop, where's the head, and then there's a kind of it comes down and there's the shoulders and that sort of thing. That's how is often referred to, or the hills are often referred to. And it's part of the Campsies, which are named after the Sidhe. And it's a great walk. It's not massively high and it's great views, but there's also a hill opposite it, which is smaller, but it's completely covered in trees. And we'd been doing some walks along the West Highland Way and things like that. And we've come up to it a couple of times and tried to investigate it. But there's, on one side, there's really, well, I wouldn't say cliffs, but, sheer rock outcrops. They're really difficult to climb up. So we did a bit of research and found alternate ways of working your way up. So that day I went up. I'm going to need to also point out there's a stone circle on a hill, small hill beside that. So it's kind of like not nearly aligned, but there is a synergy between the stone circle, this hill, and the sleeping giant, as far as we're concerned. It's got a very definite vibe. So I parked just along from the distillery, wandered up, found the lane, the little paths to get to the hill, and then took a long time to work my way up because parts of it were extremely steep. So it was kind of like crab walking sideways up and using trees to stop myself from falling back down at points. Quite an adventure. But when I got to the very top, I was struck by how raw and primal it felt. It's not managed woodland by any sense. The trees that are up there are up there by virtue of their determination to grow. The grass is long. There was a big circle of flattened grass that down to deer, sleeping there. And I did some meditation, introduced myself to the place. There were a lot of insects as well, quite aggressive flies. So I wasn't quite sweaty at that point, so they were trying to get salts or something like that. Fortunately, I'm very Scottish, so I've always got a midgie net with me when I'm out in the hills. So I sat with that on, kind of doing meditation, and I had this very gentle suggestion that it would be really good if I had a nap. That sense that just a wee bit tired, you have a wee sleep, I'll be fine. And it was kind of getting to the 3 o'clock in the afternoon point, and there was no reception in this location as well. And as that kind of thought came in, the rational part went, no, you really don't want to go down that hill in the dark or when it gets gloomier. So another kind of point where discretion over the exciting valor thing. And who knows what could have happened if I'd, actually had a nap and woken up in the middle of the night. Who knows what I might have seen. But it was interesting. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't coercive. It was very gentle and subtle. And it's not the sort of thing that I would have thought myself, because I'd gone up there specifically. Do a walk, meditate, talk to some trees, get back down the hill and away. So that was kind of good fun.
Well, there has always been something about that hill, though.
Yeah.
And we've spoken about that together ever since I was a child. Looking at that hill, there's just something about it. And we jokingly just call it the enigmatic hill. It just seems to come out of nowhere. Like the land's really, really flat, and I can imagine like really wet and boggy. It's pretty bad when we went to the stones that day, but pretty low, boggy. And this hill just pops up out of the landscape like a natural Silbury. Actually, it just, like flat, there it is. And then across the other side, you've got the sleeping giant.
Yeah.
of Dumgoyach. So you get the Dumgoyach, which is this little hill with the trees. I say little, it's not that little, but small compared to the Campsies. And there's kind of folklore about that whole part of the landscape, but no one ever talks about that hill as though it's anything special. But you found that when you were young as well.
Yeah.
There's just something about it. And when we went that day to go to the stones, the remaining stones, I think there's only actually 3 of them left in a very sort of crude alignment now. I think one's recumbent at least. I didn't want to go up the hill. And that was the other time. There's been 2 occasions where I've basically said, I don't want to go over there. And you've went, well, I'll come back one time when I'm on a day off or whatever. And that's exactly what you did. I, for some reason, didn't want to go up there. So I don't know if I'm just developing a fear of...
It's also hell steep.
It's really... Yeah.
Quite imposing.
Probably too much for me at that particular point, but it's alarming to think that you would feel relaxed enough on your own to go for a nap. So it does seem as if this was a suggestion. Quite strange, quite worrying.
Yeah. It's good that you had that's sense, whatever sense it was that came through that said, nah.
Yeah, self-preservation. So from one hill to another, and that's the most recent and what I think probably the most significant.
It will be because it was a sighting of something that we both had. And what I think the thing that struck me about this story is that when I contacted you, Joe, I had forgotten. I don't know how I could have forgotten. That's what I mean about, I think your mind sometimes tries to overprotect you and stop you thinking about these otherworldly things if you're not quite 100% sure you'll want all that in your life. You're dealing with too much already. It just went out of my mind. And I was talking to you about it, and I can't remember what it was. We were talking about the time of year, May Day. And I went, what did we... Oh, right, I know where we were. So yeah, I will be quiet and let you...
So, Beltane last year, we went to a place called Kinnoull Hill. So it's more towards the east coast, isn't it?
It's Perth. It's kind of middle, yeah.
Perth, right, smack bang in the middle of Scotland, and lovely area. And it's got quite a history about it. I
mean, I can fill in a little bit of the history after if you want, or I could do that now. It's just, well, the reason we went, the reason it was significant, I had been there when I was very young. I think I was maybe like a second year. We'd gone on a field trip to go and look at the site, scope it out, and we had all these scheduled talks, and a local historian and librarian spoke with us all about the history of the place. And I'd never even heard of it, to be honest with you. And he was telling us about the Beltane celebrations, how it was a well-known place of, dancing around the maypole, and the masked revellers who'd all go there, and very pagan. There's the Dragon's Hole, which is a cave, and there's a lot of lore about it. And just interesting things like he'd said that the children who were begotten at these celebrations were lucky. They were sort of revered and held in high esteem, and they were given the surname of things like Goodfellow or Hood to show that nobody knew who the father was, but they were a Beltane blessing. So I was hearing about all of this, and it just it struck a chord with me. And then all these years later, we were talking about just doing something to kind of mark Beltane. So we took a drive up there, and it was relatively busy. There were a lot of people at the top of the hill. There were fabulous views over the area. Dog walkers, families with young children, paths that are marked, and more rugged paths that aren't. And once we'd been at the top for a while, had a lovely time, we were heading back down the hill.
We went over.
We went a slightly different. Off
we didn't go the way we came, so we were walking around in the loop. So we went over the top of the hill and down into some woodland on the sheltered side. And we're walking down a path that's kind of circling round in a clockwise manner, and heard a crash. Undergrowth crashed and looked round, and there was a deer belting through the undergrowth. And immediately after it, we saw what looked like two large hounds, brindled pelt, kind of like marbled, mottled, brownish, red and grey. And it was struck, and this happened in like maybe a couple of seconds. Yeah. We were chasing the deer, and I was struck by how the rippling undulation of the muscles beneath their, the fur, which was short, and I get the sense of pointed ears, and they weren't small. I think they were easily as big as the deer.
Yeah. And
maybe longish tails. At that point, I'd probably be making some more stuff up, but they were away and gone in seconds. And we both just looked at each other and went,
what was that?
Weird.
Yeah.
And what happened next is the significant part of this, because it's what didn't happen. We didn't see somebody with weeds running after dogs that had slipped the weed and started to chase. We didn't hear anybody calling for dogs. I'm not even aware of.
Well,
after the crashing sound, it seemed very quiet.
I've got a slightly different perspective, because you knew where to look. Like, the crash got your attention right away. I did that thing of, what was that? And took another kind of half second to kind of turn around and look where he was looking. I don't think I got to focus quite as much, but I remember massive haunches. So really, I was just looking at the backside. I didn't see the heads or anything further forward. Really, really big. To me, it was like pale, deer-sized, but very much dog-like. But after the crash, and I don't know if you had this, because we've talked about it before, but very much for me, that eerie silence that people talk about, that sort of Oz effect where it just goes to, there was nothing. There wasn't the sound of any more rustling. There was nothing, no leaves. There were no birds. It was absolutely dead silent. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't hear them. Because I think you heard, all I heard was the crash of that deer bounding. I turn round and I see this, and it's like something out of a film. The Company of Wolves. It was almost like, kind of hazy, and what is that? And then just gone, just in a flash through the trees. And there had been so many people with dogs, and they were all walking around, and I say their families all over the place. There was nobody there. And then I'm going to say maybe like 5-10 minutes down the path near the bottom hill, there were dog walkers again. There were people walking out, and it just seemed so normal. But for a few seconds, for me, it was silent in a really eerie, otherworldly way. And I'm just so glad that we both saw that, because I probably wouldn't have believed my own eyes.
I mean, there was no other noises you'd associate with dogs. Certainly no barking or anything like that. It's almost like we'd had a very brief sighting of some kind of otherworldly hunt. Now, I'm going to get my skeptic hat back on and try and work out. So it's possible, entirely possible, that somebody had two mastiff type dogs further up around the hill who completely swept the weed and wandered off together and spooked a deer and started chasing it. Or somebody, but then again, we would have potentially seen people looking for dogs, or that kind of agitated way, because if you've ever had a dog that's disappeared, you're oh. The other thing that I think could be a potential explanation, if we're going to go with the full marsh gas approach to everything, is that somebody in nearby houses has two extremely large dogs and some terrible fencing, and the dogs caught sight of deer, and then that chase started to happen. That's the only ways I could look at this from a different perspective, and try and explain it away in rational terms.
But the reason that doesn't really work is that there were young children, like, all over the hill. And if you had dogs that were that big and powerful and you knew they were off, then, you would be running after them. You would be shouting after them. You'd be, whistling and doing anything you could to make sure that nobody was going to get hurt. But I don't think they were physically there. Personally, I don't feel they were physically there. How did I forget that?
And that was the sense you got, that there was something about it, and the silence afterwards. So that is very interesting. Yeah. Did the deer look in your direction, or did the dogs?
No. As we were walking down the path, as it kind of curved round to the right, further down, don't even think we could have seen the deer if it came from further down the hill or broke across the path. Was really the deer going through the undergrowth and that crashing sound of an animal in dire plight that caught our attention in the first place. Because quite frankly, I think we were probably wandering about going, this tree's amazing, look at there, oh, some mushrooms. But then crash, bang, attention, and it's one of those things that's very, very brief, but burned into your memory. So I'm kind of fairly confident that we recalled what we've seen correctly.
I didn't see any heads of any of the beasts at all, not the deer, nothing. It was very much a directed, this animal is going that way, and just disappearing into trees. And I didn't even see the sort of the body sideways of the dog. I just saw massive haunches just bounding. It was quite incredible, quite scary. I'm glad I wasn't the deer.
And no barking as well, no noise of the dogs. That's quite striking, isn't it?
Yeah. I didn't think of it. I don't know what to make of that in terms of an experience. It doesn't really fit into a box. But like when you'd mentioned it, it's a bit like, like the tiny little bit of a wild hunt. I was like, yeah, actually, you're right. That does kind of fit with what we saw. But, I just don't know what to make of it. That was Beltane. So that was the 1st of May. It was like 30 years since I'd been on that field trip. I remember like, let's go back. And it wasn't Beltane when I went on the field trip, but just when I was hearing about all the folklore of it and the significance of the hill and being part of the landscape, a very important part of the landscape. And we just thought, I think that tells us it's time to go and visit that hill. Do something nice for Beltane. So, yeah.
That is amazing. I love that. It's so rich, and also the fact that no one else was there. In a really kind of busy day when there's lots of families, lots of people walking around, and you just get those moments where it's like you step into another time or place, or
things overlap, or the quiet happens, and it's the sum total of
these kinds of interactions with the natural world is the magic of life. And this is the bit that we've neglected to value, if you like. We don't really think about that, do we? We don't, Indigenous cultures, traditional societies, these were very much more understood symbolically than we take for granted now, like the seeing an aspect of the wild hunt at Beltane, like seeing, being led by a hare through this threshold. They almost sound like dreams, don't they? But this is the kind of magic of the world, and it's real. And we've kind of forgotten that richness of life. But this is it. This is it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's not the kind of big wow, huge big, I don't know, spacecraft coming down in front of you, or some like Bigfoot appearing in front of you, or whatever it is. It is these moments. These are the things that tie us into the rhythm of the world. That it's like nature speaking to us. It's this kind of symbiotic communication, relationship with the natural world that is so much part of us as human beings. Because we're so busy with life, we might not notice these things. We might not see the hare. We might not decide to go through. And then there's that sense as well as, should I fall asleep and stay here? But even the fact that you sense that was kind of being asked of you, I wonder how other people would respond in those kinds of situations. And we don't know, do we? These are the kind of stories that really fill my heart. These are the kind of stories that I feel when you're telling them, because I get it. I get that sense of magic, because I've had little moments like that in my life before too. And to be able to share that together, I think, is really beautiful as well. So I think it's just very heartwarming to hear that, as partners, you've experienced these things together. I think there's like a kind of little magic thread in your relationship with each other too.
It's also nice to know you're not losing your mind, or at least you're losing your mind with somebody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like both ads together. That's fun. When I contacted you, I'd mentioned about the Aberfoyle fairy tree and the Reverend Robert Kirk and all of that folklore. Was it folklore? It's a bit more than folklore. You kind of went up a hill and were lucky you didn't fall asleep. I'm pretty sure that's very akin to what actually happened to the Reverend. He would go out almost sleepwalking and go and commune with the fairies up the hill. And of course, when you grow up in Scotland, you hear about that story of him, his spirit being imprisoned in the fairy tree at the top of Doon Hill. So yeah, that was why I'd mentioned that book, the
Hidden Commonwealth,
Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns and Fairies, which you'll have a copy of right there.
I've got it right here. I was just looking at it.
I'm just thinking about that. I hadn't made that connection, but I'd actually mentioned to Jo about that, just if she was coming up here. I should have known that Jo would know about Aberfoyle already. But it's a lovely place to visit. There used to be a fabulous art installation in the visitor centre. It was like a big sort of automaton with kind of moving tree and sort of fairies and the Reverend, and it's long gone now. I don't know what happened to it, but we've got the internet now, so everybody knows about the Doon Hill Fairy Trail and the tree up there. So it's not like it's going to be forgotten. It's going to be spread far and wide, hopefully.
Robert Kirk's grave in the cemetery at the nearby church is the only one that's not facing the traditional direction. It's actually pointing at the hill.
So the rest of the graves are all aligned neatly, and Robert Kirk's is facing the tree, facing the hill where the tree is. Have you managed to go to the Doon Hill?
In September 2024, I visited the Scottish Highlands with my family, and we took a trip to Aberfoyle. We walked up Doon Hill, and when we reached the top, I stayed and meditated at the fairy tree. I met a man there who had left an offering some time ago, and he credited his interaction with this magical place in providing a blessing in his life. And I spoke to him about that. And that conversation is going to be released within the next couple of months as an episode, so look out for that. It is a very interesting story about, what happened to him, and then of course what came next with the idea of trying to free him by throwing the knife over his head to free him from the fairy world. There's a novel based on the story too, called, I think it's The Ninth Child. You might enjoy reading that. It's really good.
Yeah.
And he it's as if he reappears. It's as if he kind of like reappears sort of centuries later. Do you ever have a kind of backup plan? Do you ever have some methods of protection so that when you're going to these places, if, say, for instance, don't fall asleep, or do you take anything with you, or do anything in order to kind of protect in these places?
I've got tattooing that I basically designed it all myself, and it's most of the parts of me that don't face forward, and that's kind of my shield and armour. And it's kind of something that I can activate, and that is kind of what I use, kind of a shields up approach. Sometimes you don't know what other people have been doing or have left behind at many of these places, so it's always good to take precautions, but not to go in so heavy-handed that you're frightening anybody else off. So tact, diplomacy and respect also work quite well. So whenever we go somewhere, I like to introduce myself, just who I am, where I'm from, what I'm here for, just that sort of thing.
I'm leaving an offering that's biodegradable or something respectful. Well, that's the problem with a lot of sites, is that people will take plastic ribbon and tie it on trees, and leaving coins, which isn't helpful for trees either. So yeah, you're careful about what we would take with us, and maybe just sometimes light a little bit of incense and just enjoy the surroundings, and whatever we bring, we take away, unless it's something for the forest folk or the birds or whoever happens to be there. Yeah,
and also not taking things willy-nilly. Again, that's just a general respect thing. You wouldn't start chipping bits of a stone circle off, or raking branches off a tree. So anywhere we've been where we've picked anything up, it's generally been wind blown, a feather that we've found, just generally that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Trying to tread lightly.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks. That's just really nice to hear how you kind of meet a place. Do you ever find that the sense you get of a place kind of changes over time? Do you ever have that experience if you ever go to places?
Yeah. A familiarity can develop. We're quite close to the Forth and Clyde Canal as it passes through Glasgow. So there's some spots along there that, just like to sit and meditate in. It's been developed and changed over time as well. So, there was a point where it was an area that you wouldn't necessarily want to go, just because it was unattended and overgrown. But it's come into its own with a bit of development and care, and it's an amazing source of wildlife. I've heard kingfishers, herons, frogs,
otters.
Apparently, otters use it to kind of as a wildlife corridor, because it basically cuts Scotland in half. So, yeah, it's amazing. The buzzards as well.
There's a lot. Thinking about it, just looking back, quite a few years ago now, you decided that your Sunday morning kind of ritual was going to be, rather than going to a place of worship like a church, Brian was just going along the canal with a litter picker and just picking up the rubbish from the grass verges and the banks and so forth. And I think you were maybe tapping into something, because there's been so much investment and care and love and development in that canal in recent years that we couldn't have actually imagined. I can't remember how much the bridge cost, but we've had a bridge put in. It's been getting built over since lockdown. Yeah, it took a long time to build it. I can't remember if it was million, 16 million. It was a lot of money, a huge investment to connect the three areas of the city that had been disconnected by this Y-shaped split that the canal has. And it's brilliant. It means that people are cycling from one part to the other. People are out once again walking their dogs, jogging. Women are jogging on their own. That's always really good to see, because you wouldn't walk alone along the canal years ago. I certainly would not have walked alone along there. And just in the last, was it February or March, they revealed a beautiful art installation, a huge sculpture of a Scottish water dragon, a Bethia, and it's all tiled, and the communities are getting together, schools are coming together and making these little ceramic tiles and putting the scales on this big water dragon. So it's really gone from a very desolate and it's quite a scary place at times to being somewhere that families are coming. We had a pop-up opera up there in the summer, and maybe you were just tapping into the
general vibe. Yeah. I mean, when we say it was scary, we're talking about 20 years ago. Yeah. And the Bethia is counterbalanced to the Kelpie sculpture in Falkirk.
Right.
So it's two absolutely stunning rearing horse heads at the Falkirk wheel element part. They're amazing. So we've kind of got two very different, spiritual animals at different parts of the canal. And Pamela mentioned there's a point where there's a three-way junction, which I've always thought was quite magical, and different parts of the canal will cross roads, other parts of it cross the River Kelvin. So in its own right, it crosses different energy currents.
We have a Victorian aqueduct that carries the canal across the River Kelvin, which is quite spectacular. So if you're standing on that bridge and just looking over at the water cascading down, and you just think about the power of all that energy, and then the man-made part sort of floating above. So I think we're quite lucky where we live. From here, you've got an absolutely perfect view of Dumgoyach, which is the sleeping giant. You can see him sleeping there. And you can imagine maybe I don't know, thousands of years ago, beacons and just those lines of sight. But that's just my fanciful notion about where we live.
I love that. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, find and make the magic where you are.